The grand arena of Zephyria Prime stretched out like a metallic coliseum, its crystalline walls humming with energy barriers that could contain the most devastating weapons known to the galaxy. Princess Lyralii of the Vorthak Empire stood on her elevated platform, her 6 arms crossed in a gesture of supreme confidence. Her iridescent scales caught the light from the twin suns overhead, creating a dazzling display that matched her arrogant smile. "Behold, citizens of the galaxy," her voice echoed through the arena's amplification systems, reaching the millions of spectators both present and watching through quantum broadcasts across star systems. Today we witness the final humiliation of the species that dared to challenge our empire. The crowd roared its approval. Representatives from dozens of alien civilizations filled the stands, their various forms creating a tapestry of colors, tentacles, wings, and exotic anatomies. All had come to witness what the Vorthak called the Breaking, a ritual combat designed to crush the spirit of rebellious species. In the center of the arena stood a simple human male, appearing unremarkable by galactic standards. He wore no armor, carried no visible weapons, and seemed almost fragile compared to the towering alien warriors that had fallen before Vorthak might. His name was Marcus Chun, though few in the audience knew or cared about such details. To them, he was simply the last representative of a stubborn species that refused to accept proper subjugation. "Human," Princess Lyralii's voice dripped with condescension as she addressed him directly. "Your pathetic planet has resisted our rule for far too long. Your military has been scattered, your cities burned, and your leaders cower in hidden bunkers. Yet still, you send this specimen to face our champion in single combat." She gestured toward the far end of the arena, where massive gates began to grind open. The sound was like mountains moving, a deep rumble that made the ground tremble. "Behold Kroth the Destroyer, conqueror of 17 worlds, slayer of the Titan worms of Androxa, and champion of our empire for the past 3 centuries." What emerged from the gates defied easy description. Kroth stood nearly 4 meters tall, his body a fusion of organic tissue and mechanical augmentation. Bladed appendages extended from his forearms, each one capable of cleaving through battleship armor. His eyes glowed with an inner fire that spoke of countless battles and victories. Scars covered every visible inch of his body, testament to wars across the galaxy. The crowd cheers reached a deafening crescendo as Kroth stepped into the arena proper. Each footstep left deep impressions in the reinforced flooring. He turned toward the human and let out a roar that could be heard even over the crowd's enthusiasm. Princess Lyralii raised one of her arms for silence, and the arena gradually quieted. "The rules are simple, human. You have 1 minute to impress us. 1 minute to show us why your species deserves anything other than complete annihilation. When that minute expires, Kroth will end your life, and we will proceed with the systematic extermination of every human in the galaxy." Marcus Chun had not moved throughout this entire display. He stood quietly in the center of the arena, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the proceedings with what appeared to be mild interest. When the princess finished speaking, he finally raised his head to meet her gaze. "A minute?" he asked, his voice carrying clearly through the arena despite not being amplified. "That seems generous." The comment sent ripples of laughter through the crowd. Even Princess Lyralii seemed amused by what they interpreted as either bravado or delusion. She leaned forward on her platform, her scaled features twisting into a predatory grin. "Oh, you misunderstand, little human. A minute is all you get. Not to win. That's impossible. Simply to provide some entertainment before your inevitable death. Perhaps you'll run around the arena in panic? Maybe you'll beg for mercy? Or will you simply stand there and accept your fate?" "A minute is all I get," Marcus repeated, seeming to consider this carefully. "And what exactly happens if I manage to defeat your champion in that time?" The question was so absurd that it took several seconds for Princess Lyralii to process it. When she did, her laughter was like the tinkling of crystal bells mixed with the hiss of a serpent. "Defeat Kroth? In 1 minute? Oh, human, your delusions know no bounds. But, very well, I'll humor your fantasy. If And when I say if, I mean when the impossible occurs and reality ceases to function properly. If you somehow defeat Croth, the Vorthak Empire will withdraw from human space and never return. She paused, her expression growing more serious. But understand this, Croth has never been defeated. He has faced the greatest warriors the galaxy has ever produced. He has battled creatures that could crush your entire planet. Has he ever fought a human? Marcus interrupted quietly. The interruption caused a shocked silence to fall over the arena. No one interrupted Princess Lyralii. The very concept was unthinkable. Several of her guards moved closer to their weapons, unsure whether this constituted a threat that required immediate action. Princess Lyralii's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. No, she admitted after a long pause. He has not had that particular pleasure. Humans have never been considered worthy opponents. You're a young species, barely having achieved faster-than-light travel. You have no notable warriors, no great military traditions, no legendary heroes whose names echo across the stars. Interesting, Marcus said, and for the first time since entering the arena, he smiled. There was something about that smile that made Princess Lyralii feel the first flicker of unease, though she couldn't explain why. It wasn't threatening or cruel or manic. It was simply confident, utterly, completely confident in a way that made no sense given the circumstances. "Begin the minute," she commanded, her voice sharper than intended. A massive holographic timer appeared above the arena, showing 60 seconds in glowing numerals. As it began to count down, the crowd fell silent, waiting to see how this human would spend his final moments of life. 59, 58, 57. Croft began his charge, bladed arms extended, his roar echoing off the arena walls. The ground shook with each step as tons of enhanced muscle and machinery bore down on the small human figure. Marcus Chin didn't move. He simply stood there, hands still clasped behind his back, watching the approaching champion with the same mild interest he'd shown throughout the proceedings. The crowd began to murmur. Surely he would run, or at least try to dodge. 54, 53, 52. When Croth was less than 10 meters away, moving fast enough to cross that distance in a heartbeat, Marcus finally acted. But what he did defied all expectations. Instead of running or fighting or begging, he simply said, in a conversational tone that somehow carried to every corner of the arena, "Computer and safety protocols." The words made no sense to anyone present. There was no computer in the arena, no safety protocols to disengage. It seemed like the final delusion of a mind snapping under pressure. But then Marcus Chun began to change. It started subtly, a straightening of his posture, a shift in how he held himself. But then the changes became more dramatic and impossible to ignore. His skin began to glow with a faint inner light. His eyes, previously ordinary brown, now shone with an intensity that rivaled stars. And, most unsettling of all, he began to grow. Not dramatically, not like some fantastical transformation, but with the steady inevitability of a tide. Muscle mass increased beneath his clothing. His frame expanded. His presence in the arena seemed to multiply exponentially, as if he were somehow taking up more space than his physical form should allow. 50, 49, 48. Croth, committed to his charge, couldn't stop even as his primitive brain began screaming warnings. He crashed into Marcus with enough force to demolish a building, his bladed arms swinging in perfect arcs designed to slice the human into pieces. They never connected. Marcus moved with fluid grace that seemed to bend the laws of physics. His hand came up and caught Croth's right blade between two fingers, stopping the strike completely. The champion's momentum was arrested so abruptly that the shockwave rippled outward, cracking the arena floor in a perfect circle around them. The crowd's silence was now absolute. Even Princess Lyralii had stopped breathing, her mind struggling to process what she was witnessing. 45, 44, 43. You want to know what humans are really capable of? Marcus asked, his voice now carrying harmonics that shouldn't have been possible from a biological throat. You want to see what we become when we stop pretending to be just another species in your galaxy? With casual ease, he twisted Krotha's blade until the metal screamed and snapped. The champion tried to bring his other arm around, but Marcus caught that one too, his grip leaving fingerprint impressions in metal that was supposedly harder than diamond. "We are not from your galaxy," Marcus continued, his transformation accelerating. His clothing began to shift and flow, revealing itself to be some form of adaptive technology rather than simple fabric. "We are not bound by your rules or limited by your understanding of what's possible." 3938. Kroth, desperate now, triggered every weapon system built into his enhanced body. Energy beams, projectile weapons, chemical sprays, sonic disruptors. Everything fired at once in a display of destructive power that should have vaporized anything in the immediate vicinity. Marcus didn't even blink. The various forms of attack struck some kind of barrier around him and simply stopped. Energy dissipated harmlessly. Projectiles fell to the ground. Chemicals broke down into harmless components. We come from a place where the very concept of impossibility is just another problem to be solved, Marcus said, and now his feet were no longer touching the ground. He hovered in the air, still holding Krotha's arms, the champion's feet dangling uselessly. 35, 34, 33. Princess Lyralii, finally, found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. What are you?" Marcus turned to look at her, and she immediately wished he hadn't. His gaze was like staring into the heart of a quasar, infinite depths containing energies that could reshape reality itself. "We are human," he said simply, "and we have been very, very patient with you." The timer continued its relentless countdown, but time itself seemed to have taken on a different quality within the arena. Every second stretched like an eternity as the assembled crowd tried to comprehend what they were witnessing. 30, 29, 28. Marcus released Krotha's mangled arms, and the champion crashed to the arena floor with a sound like a falling starship. The greatest warrior in Vorthak history lay there motionless, not dead, but completely overwhelmed by forces beyond his understanding. His enhanced systems sparked and failed one by one, unable to process the energies they had just encountered. "You see," Marcus said, his voice now resonating with harmonics that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Your empire made a critical error in its assessment of humanity. You judged us by the standards of species that evolved naturally within this galaxy, bound by its physical laws and limited by its resources." He began to walk slowly across the arena, each step creating ripples in the air itself. The very atmosphere seemed to bend around him, as if reality was having trouble maintaining its grip in his presence. "But we didn't evolve here," Marcus continued. "We come from somewhere else entirely, a place where the fundamental constants of physics are more flexible, where consciousness and matter interact in ways your science cannot comprehend." Princess Lyralii tried to retreat from her platform, but found herself unable to move, not because of any external force, but because her body refused to obey her commands. Every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to freeze, to submit, to acknowledge the presence of something infinitely more dangerous than anything she had ever encountered. 25, 24, 23. "You want to know why humans seem so unremarkable when you observe us?" Marcus asked, though he appeared to be addressing the entire galaxy rather than just the arena's occupants. "It's because we've been wearing restraints, limiting ourselves, pretending to be just another carbon-based species stumbling through space." The holographic displays around the arena began to flicker and distort, not from technical failure, but as if the information they were trying to process was too complex for their systems to handle. Images of Marcus began to fragment and multiply, showing him from impossible angles that suggested he existed in more dimensions than the standard 3. "We do this because we've learned, through bitter experience across multiple realities, what happens when a species with our capabilities acts without restraint. We've seen universes burn. We've watched galaxies collapse under the weight of uncontrolled power. We've been the cause of such destruction ourselves, in iterations of existence that your language lacks words to describe." 2019-18. The crowd was beginning to panic now. Various alien species were trying to flee the arena, but the exits seemed impossibly far away. Space itself was warping around Marcus, creating a pocket of altered reality that encompassed the entire structure. Those watching the quantum broadcasts across the galaxy found their feeds cutting to static, as if the very act of observing what was happening was more than their technology could bear. So, we learned restraint. Marcus said, his form now shifting between solid matter and something that resembled living energy. We learned to limit ourselves, to appear weak, to let other species believe they were the masters of their own domains. We became actors in our own lives, pretending to struggle with challenges that we could solve with a thought. He stopped walking and turned to face Princess Lyralii directly. When their eyes met, she experienced a moment of complete terror as her consciousness briefly touched something vast and incomprehensible. She saw flashes of other realities, other versions of herself, other possible outcomes to this encounter. In some, she never existed at all. In others, her entire species was nothing but a footnote in histories written by beings whose very existence rewrote the fundamental laws of causality. 15, 14, 13. But your empire made a mistake, Marcus said, his voice now carrying undertones that seemed to originate from outside normal space-time. You decided that human restraint was human weakness. You interpreted our peaceful nature as submission. You mistook our choice to limit ourselves as inability to defend ourselves. Around the arena, reality began to fracture in small ways. Gravity reversed itself in patches, creating impossible waterfalls of debris flowing upward. Color drained from certain sections while others became so saturated they hurt to look at. The boundaries between matter and energy began to blur, with solid objects occasionally flickering into pure light before snapping back to their original forms. When you attacked our colonies, we tried to maintain the illusion, Marcus continued. We fought back with conventional weapons, using strategies and technologies that fit within your understanding of warfare. We hoped you would recognize the futility of your aggression and withdraw. 10 on 8. But you interpreted our measured response as desperation. You saw our attempts at diplomacy as weakness. You convinced yourselves that humanity was simply another species to be conquered and enslaved. The timer above the arena began to flicker wildly, its digits becoming increasingly erratic as the countdown approached its conclusion. Time itself seemed to be rebelling against the constraints placed upon it, minutes occurring in seconds while seconds stretched into hours. So now, Marcus said, and for the first time since his transformation began, he smiled again. It was not a pleasant expression. It contained the weight of countless civilizations, the memory of realities unmade and remade, the accumulated wisdom and weariness of a species that had transcended the normal limitations of existence. 765. Now we stop pretending. The change that overcame Marcus in those final seconds defied every law of physics the assembled aliens thought they understood. His human form didn't disappear so much as expand, becoming something that existed across multiple planes of reality simultaneously. He was still recognizably human, but he was also something far more vast and terrible, a being whose consciousness spanned dimensions, whose power could reshape matter at the subatomic level, whose very presence warped the fabric of space-time. 4, 3, 2. Princess Lyralii found her voice one last time, managing to whisper a single word. Impossible. Marcus heard her, and his response came not through sound but directly into her mind, into the minds of every being in the arena, and through quantum entanglement, into the consciousness of every member of the Vorthack Empire across the galaxy. Impossible is a word used by species that haven't learned to think beyond their limitations. His voice echoed through countless minds simultaneously. We stopped believing in impossible a very long time ago. 1. The timer reached 0, and Princess Lyralii's promise was fulfilled. Marcus had defeated Kroth in exactly 1 minute, though defeated seemed an inadequate word for what had actually occurred. The champion of the Vorthack Empire lay motionless on the arena floor, not dead, but fundamentally changed. His consciousness had been expanded, forced to experience reality from the perspective of a being whose existence transcended normal dimensional boundaries. He would never be the same warrior he had been, because he now understood how small and limited that warrior had actually been. 0. In the silence that followed, Marcus slowly returned to something resembling his original form, though he retained an aura of barely contained energy that made him difficult to look at directly. He walked over to where Croft lay and knelt beside the fallen champion. "You fought well," he said gently, his voice once again recognizably human, but still carrying harmonics of vast power. "Within the limitations of your understanding, you were truly formidable. But now you see what lies beyond those limitations. Use that knowledge wisely." Croft's eyes focused with difficulty, and when he spoke, his voice was filled with awe and terror. "What were humans really?" Marcus considered the question carefully before answering. "We are what every species could become, given enough time and the right choices. We are possibility incarnate, the result of consciousness refusing to accept any boundary as permanent. We are hope and nightmare combined, the proof that intelligence can transcend any limitation, and the warning of what that transcendence might cost." He stood and turned back toward Princess Lyralii, who remained frozen on her platform, her mind still struggling to process what she had witnessed. "The minute is over," Marcus said simply. "By your own words, the Vorthak Empire will now withdraw from human space and never return. But before you go, you need to understand something important." The arena around them began to return to normal, reality reasserting itself as Marcus allowed the local distortions to fade. But the memory of what had happened, the knowledge of what humans were truly capable of, would remain forever burned into the consciousness of everyone who had witnessed it. "This is not a threat," Marcus continued, his tone conversational, but carrying an undertone of absolute certainty. "This is a revelation. You now know what we are, what we've always been. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge?" Princess Lyralii found herself able to move again as reality stabilized around the arena, but she made no attempt to flee. The knowledge of what she had just witnessed pressed down on her consciousness like the weight of a collapsed star. Every instinct told her to run, to gather her fleets, and retreat to the furthest edges of known space, but a deeper understanding held her in place. Running from humans would be like trying to outrun the concept of mathematics itself. "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you possess such power, why did you let us invade your space at all? Why did you allow your colonies to burn, your people to suffer?" Marcus walked slowly across the arena floor, his footsteps echoing in the unnatural silence. The crowd remained frozen in their seats, afraid that any movement might draw the attention of this being who had just casually violated every law of physics they thought immutable. "Because," Marcus said, his tone carrying the weight of eons, "power without wisdom is destruction. We learned that lesson across multiple iterations of existence, in realities where versions of humanity wielded their capabilities without restraint. We watched ourselves become the very monsters we had originally sought to protect others from." He stopped near the center of the arena, where the ground still bore the cracks from his earlier interaction with Croft. "In one reality, we eliminated every threat to human expansion by simply erasing hostile species from existence. Not killing them, making it so they had never existed at all. We achieved perfect security and perfect peace." The air around Marcus shimmered as he spoke, and for a moment, the arena's occupants caught glimpses of other possibilities, other timelines where different choices had led to radically different outcomes. They saw human fleets that moved between dimensions, human scientists who treated galaxies like laboratories, human philosophers who debated the ethics of creating new universes for experimental purposes. "It was the most profound loneliness imaginable," Marcus continued. "A universe filled with the echoes of civilizations that might have been, could have been, should have been. We had achieved everything we thought we wanted, and in doing so, we lost everything that made achievement meaningful." Princess Lyralii felt something she had never experienced before, genuine curiosity about a species other than her own. The Vorthak had always been conquerors, taking what they wanted from lesser civilizations without considering the cost. But this human spoke of consequences that transcended mere victory or defeat. "So you chose to limit yourselves," she said, beginning to understand. "You decided to pretend to be weak." "Not pretend," Marcus corrected gently. "We chose to become weak, to bind ourselves with limitations we could remove, but chose not to. We developed what we call the consensus, a shared agreement among all human consciousness that we would exist within normal physical laws unless extraordinary circumstances demanded otherwise." Around the arena, the various alien species were beginning to stir, their own consciousness slowly adapting to the revelation they had witnessed. But they moved carefully, like prey animals in the presence of a sleeping predator, aware that their continued existence depended on not provoking a response. "The consensus is not a law," Marcus explained. "It's a choice we make every moment of every day. Every human is capable of what you just witnessed, but we have agreed to exist as if we were not. We live normal lives, face normal challenges, experience normal limitations. We do this because it preserves the meaning of existence itself. But your invasion changed that," Princess Lyralii said, pieces of understanding falling into place. "We forced you to break your consensus." Marcus shook his head. "No, your invasion was handled entirely within the bounds of the consensus. Our response was deliberately limited to conventional warfare because we hoped to preserve the illusion that you were facing just another species. We wanted to give you the opportunity to withdraw without ever knowing what you had truly threatened." He turned to look directly at her, and she found herself unable to look away from eyes that contained depths no organic evolution should have been able to produce. "But your challenge today required a different response. When you demanded a demonstration of human capability in single combat, you created a situation where the consensus had to be temporarily suspended." The implications hit Princess Lyralii like a physical blow. "You mean, when you transformed, when you defeated Croth, that wasn't even your full capability? What you witnessed was a single human, operating under significant restraints, revealing only the smallest fraction of what we are capable of," Marcus confirmed. "And even that much was enough to fundamentally alter local space-time, disable your greatest warrior without harming him, and create effects that your technology cannot properly observe or record." Around the arena, various recording devices were indeed malfunctioning. The quantum broadcasts that had been carrying this event to viewers across the galaxy had dissolved into static the moment Marcus began his transformation. No instrument created by galactic science could properly capture or analyze what they had witnessed. "We could have ended your empire at any point," Marcus continued. "Not through warfare or conquest, but by simply deciding that it should not exist. We could have reached back through time and prevented the first Vorthak from ever evolving. We could have altered the fundamental forces in your region of space to make advanced technology impossible. We could have done 1,000 things that would have eliminated the threat you represent without ever raising a weapon." Princess Lyralii felt her worldview crumbling around her. Everything the Vorthak had believed about power, about conquest, about their place in the galaxy, was revealed to be built on a foundation of fundamental ignorance. They had been children playing at war, while giants watched with patient amusement. "Then why didn't you?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why did you let us believe we were strong? Why did you allow the illusion to continue?" Marcus's expression softened slightly, and, for a moment, he looked almost entirely human again. Because strength that has never been tested is not truly strength at all. Because a universe where every challenge is eliminated before it can develop is a universe without growth, without meaning, without the possibility of genuine achievement. He began walking toward her platform, each step measured and deliberate. "We let you believe you were conquerors because you needed to learn what conquest actually means. We allowed you to think you were the apex predators of this galaxy because that was the only way for you to discover the limitations of predation as a philosophy. And now?" Princess Lyralii asked, her voice barely audible. What happens now that we know? Now you have a choice, Marcus said, reaching the base of her platform. You can continue to define yourselves through conquest and domination, knowing that you will always be children playing with toys in the shadow of beings who could unmake you with a thought. Or you can choose to grow beyond those limitations. The arena fell silent again as everyone processed the weight of what was being offered. This was not surrender or defeat in any conventional sense. It was an opportunity for fundamental transformation. What would growth look like for us? Princess Lyralii asked. That's not for us to determine, Marcus replied. True growth can only come from within. But I can tell you what we've learned from our own journey. That the greatest power is not the ability to impose your will on others, but the wisdom to know when not to use that ability. Around the arena, Vorthak soldiers and officials were beginning to understand the full scope of their situation. They had not been defeated by superior military force. They had been educated about the nature of reality itself. Their weapons, their fleets, their entire concept of power and dominance had been revealed as elaborate illusions. The choice is yours, Marcus said, his form beginning to fade back toward normal human appearance. But understand that this revelation cannot be contained or forgotten. Every member of your empire who witnessed this event, either directly or through quantum broadcast, now carries the knowledge of what humans truly are. He paused, his transformation nearly complete, but still radiating an aura of barely contained possibility. We have shown you this not as a threat, but as an invitation. The universe is far stranger, far more wonderful, and far more dangerous than any of our species have previously imagined. We offer you the chance to explore that universe as partners rather than conquerors. Princess Lyralii felt something she had never experienced before. Hope mixed with terror, curiosity tempered by wisdom, ambition redirected toward goals she couldn't yet comprehend. The Vorthak Empire would never be the same after this day, but perhaps that was not the tragedy she had initially thought it would be. And if we refuse, she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Marcus smiled sadly. Then you continue to exist as you always have, but with the knowledge of how small that existence truly is. We will not force change upon you. That would violate everything we've learned about the value of choice and growth. But we will not pretend anymore either. The arena began to return to normal as Marcus completed his transformation back to apparent humanity. But everyone present knew that normal was a concept that no longer applied. They had seen beyond the veil of ordinary reality, and that sight could never be unseen. The minute is over, Marcus said, echoing Princess Lyralii's earlier words. By your own promise, the Vorthak Empire will withdraw from human space. But more than that, you now have the opportunity to withdraw from the limitations that have defined your existence. He turned and began walking toward the arena's exit, his footsteps no longer shaking the ground, his presence no longer distorting reality. But the memory of what he had revealed would echo through galactic civilization for generations to come. Consider it carefully, he said without turning back. The choice you make now will determine not just the fate of your empire, but your species' relationship with possibilities you can't yet imagine. The aftermath of the arena demonstration rippled through the galaxy like waves from a thrown stone, but the waves carried information that fundamentally changed everyone they touched. Within hours of Marcus's revelation, every major civilization had received fragments of the quantum broadcasts, emergency reports from their representatives at the arena, and increasingly frantic communications from Vorthak territories. Princess Lyralii found herself in the unprecedented position of having to explain to her empire's ruling council that they had just suffered the most complete defeat in galactic history without a single shot being fired in return. She stood in the great chamber of the Imperial Palace on Vorthak Prime, facing the assembled leaders who had built their civilization on the principle of overwhelming force. You're telling us, General Karatha's voice carried the edge of disbelief that had become familiar in the past several hours, that this human simply chose to reveal abilities that make our entire military irrelevant. Not just our military, Princess Lyralii replied, her own voice still carrying traces of the awe and terror she had experienced in the arena. Everything we understand about power, about physics, about the nature of reality itself. He didn't just defeat Croth. He demonstrated that our entire worldview is based on fundamental misconceptions. The council chamber fell silent as the implications settled over them like a suffocating blanket. These were beings who had conquered 17 star systems, who had never encountered a force they couldn't overwhelm or outmaneuver. The concept of absolute powerlessness was as foreign to them as the idea of breathing underwater. "Show us the recordings," demanded Admiral XYPH, her scaled hands gripping the edge of her seat. "We need to see this for ourselves." "There are no complete recordings," Princess Lyralii admitted. "Every device that attempted to capture the transformation failed. We have fragments, pieces of data that make no sense when analyzed separately. Our best scientists are calling it impossible, but impossibility appears to be a concept that humans have moved beyond." Meanwhile, across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place in the halls of power of every major civilization. The crystalline hegemony's geometric leaders recalculated probability matrices that kept returning impossible results. The Hive Collective's shared consciousness experienced something unprecedented, doubt about the completeness of their knowledge. The ancient ethereal confederation, beings of pure energy who had considered themselves the most advanced species in known space, found themselves re-evaluating assumptions they had held for millions of years. But perhaps the most significant conversations were happening in human space, where colonies that had been under siege just days before were now trying to understand what had just been revealed about their own species. Dr. Sarah Martinez, chief xenobiologist at the Human Colonial Authority, sat in an emergency session with the Human High Command, struggling to process information that challenged everything she thought she knew about her own people. "Are you telling me," she asked Admiral Harrison, "that every human has the potential for what we witnessed in that arena?" "According to the briefing materials we've just received," Admiral Harrison replied, his voice carefully controlled, "the answer appears to be yes. But it's more complex than simple potential. What Mr. Chen demonstrated required the temporary suspension of what they call the consensus." "The consensus," Dr. Martinez repeated, "a collective agreement among all human consciousness to limit our own abilities. And we're all part of this agreement without knowing it." "According to the documents, yes. Every human born after the consensus was established is automatically included in the shared limitation. We live normal lives, face normal challenges, and experience normal physical constraints because we have collectively agreed to do so." Dr. Martinez felt her understanding of human nature shifting like sand beneath her feet. "But why? Why would we choose to limit ourselves so severely?" The answer came not from Admiral Harrison, but from a voice that materialized in the room without any visible source, a side effect of technologies that operated beyond conventional physics. "Because unlimited power corrupts absolutely," Marcus Chun said, his form gradually solidifying in the center of the conference room. "And we learned that lesson in ways that nearly destroyed not just ourselves, but the fundamental structure of reality itself." The assembled officers and scientists reacted with varying degrees of shock and awe. Marcus appeared exactly as he had before his transformation in the arena, an unremarkable human male who could have been anyone's neighbor. But now they knew what lay beneath that ordinary appearance. "The consensus isn't a prison," Marcus continued, seeming to address the question that was on everyone's mind. "It's a choice we make to preserve meaning in existence. When you can reshape reality with a thought, when you can solve every problem by simply deciding it doesn't exist, when you can eliminate every challenge by altering the fundamental laws of physics, life itself becomes meaningless." Dr. Martinez found her voice. "But surely there must be some middle ground? Some way to use these abilities constructively without losing all meaning." Marcus smiled sadly. "We've tried that across multiple realities, multiple iterations of human development. The problem is that power, true power, is addictive in ways that transcend simple psychology. When you can solve any problem by expanding your capabilities, the temptation to do so becomes overwhelming. So you chose to become voluntarily weak," Admiral Harrison observed. We chose to become authentically human, Marcus corrected, to preserve the experiences and challenges that made our existence meaningful. Love, loss, struggle, achievement, growth, all of these concepts lose their meaning when you possess unlimited power to alter their outcomes. Around the table, the assembled humans began to grapple with questions that had no easy answers. They were learning that they belonged to a species that had transcended the normal limitations of existence, but had chosen to bind themselves with artificial constraints in order to preserve the very essence of what made them human. What about choice? Dr. Martinez asked. Don't we have the right to know about our own capabilities? To decide for ourselves whether to accept these limitations? You're making that choice right now, Marcus replied. Every human who learns about the consensus must decide whether to accept it or attempt to transcend it. But understand the cost. Breaking free from the consensus means leaving humanity behind in any meaningful sense. What do you mean? Admiral Harrison asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of profound loss. Those who have chosen to transcend the consensus still exist, but they no longer experience reality in ways that we would recognize as human. They become something else, beings of pure consciousness and unlimited capability who can reshape universes but can no longer understand why a sunset is beautiful or why the laughter of children matters. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated this revelation. They were being offered a choice between remaining authentically human with all the limitations that entailed, or transcending those limitations at the cost of everything that made the transcendence meaningful. How many of us know? Dr. Martinez finally asked. Now, perhaps a few thousand across all human colonies, Marcus replied. The revelation in the arena was necessary to prevent the complete destruction of the Vorthak Empire, but we've tried to limit its spread while we determine how to handle the consequences. And the other species? What will they do with this knowledge? Marcus's expression grew thoughtful. That remains to be seen. Some will likely try to develop technologies or abilities to match what they witnessed. Others will retreat into isolation, afraid to interact with a species they now know could eliminate them effortlessly. A few might choose to grow beyond their current limitations and explore possibilities they never imagined. Admiral Harrison leaned forward. And the Vorthak specifically? Princess Lyralii is reconsidering everything her people have believed about power and conquest, Marcus said. Whether that leads to genuine growth or simply more sophisticated forms of aggression remains to be determined. Dr. Martinez felt the weight of cosmic responsibility settling on her shoulders. What do we do now? How do we move forward with this knowledge? Very carefully, Marcus replied. The revelation in the arena has changed the fundamental dynamics of galactic civilization. We can no longer pretend to be just another species struggling with normal limitations. But we also cannot allow unlimited knowledge of our capabilities to spread without control. So we become guardians, Admiral Harrison said slowly, protecting other species from both external threats and the knowledge of what we truly are. We become what we've always been, Marcus corrected. Humans who choose to remain human, despite having the power to become something far more and far less than that. The only difference is that now some of us know we're making that choice. The meeting continued deep into the night as humanity began to grapple with the implications of its revealed nature. Across the galaxy, other species were having similar conversations, trying to determine how to exist in a universe where one civilization possessed capabilities that transcended normal physical law. But, in the end, the most important conversations were the simplest ones, the discussions between individuals about what it meant to be human, what values were worth preserving, and what kind of future they wanted to build together. The galaxy would never be the same after the minute that changed everything. But perhaps, with wisdom and careful choices, it could become something better than anyone had previously imagined possible. 5 years had passed since the day that became known throughout the galaxy as the Minute of Revelation. The universe had not ended, as some had predicted, nor had humanity ascended to become cosmic overlords, as others had feared. Instead, something far more complex and hopeful had begun to emerge. Princess Lyralii, now calling herself simply Lyra, stood on the observation deck of the research station orbiting Kepler 442b, watching human and Vorthack scientists work together in the laboratories below. The sight would have been unimaginable just 5 years ago, when her people had defined themselves entirely through conquest and domination. Now, former warriors studied philosophy, former generals became teachers, and former conquerors learned the art of creation. The quantum resonance studies are showing remarkable progress, Dr. Sarah Martinez said, joining Lyra at the observation window. The human scientist had become an unlikely friend over the years, helping to bridge the gap between species that operated under fundamentally different assumptions about reality. Your people have learned quickly, Lyra replied, though her tone carried nuances that hadn't existed in Vorthack language before their transformation. They had developed new words to describe concepts like collaborative curiosity and voluntary limitation, ideas that had no equivalent in their previous culture. It helps that we're all learning together, Sarah said. Honestly, most humans were as ignorant about our true nature as any other species. The consensus was so complete that even we didn't realize what we were choosing to give up. Below them, a mixed team of researchers was working on what they called the Possibility Engine, a device designed to help other species safely explore capabilities beyond their normal limitations without risking the kind of transcendence that would strip away their essential nature. It was delicate work, requiring precise understanding of the relationship between consciousness, reality, and identity. The project had emerged from discussions between human philosophers and Vorthack scientists who were trying to understand how power could be expanded without corruption. The results had implications far beyond any single species. The crystalline hegemony has requested permission to observe the next test, Sarah mentioned casually, though both women understood the significance. The geometric beings have been among the most skeptical of post-revelation cooperation, convinced that their mathematical perfection made them superior to what they called organic chaos. And the Hive Collective? Lyra asked. They've submitted a formal proposal for consciousness-sharing experiments. They want to understand how individual minds can voluntarily limit themselves while maintaining connection to greater awareness. Sarah paused, considering the implications. It's actually quite similar to what humans achieved with the consensus, but approaching it from the opposite direction. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Species that had spent millennia developing in isolation were now discovering that their greatest challenges and opportunities lay in understanding each other's approach to the fundamental questions of existence. A soft chime indicated an incoming priority communication. The holographic display that materialized showed Marcus Chun, though he appeared to be speaking from somewhere that definitely wasn't bound by normal physical laws. Space bent around him in gentle curves, and stars wheeled in the background in patterns that suggested multiple dimensions intersecting. Lyra, Sarah, Marcus said, his voice carrying the same warm humanity it had always possessed, despite the cosmic scope of his current location. I wanted to update you on the situation with the Ethereal Confederation. Have they made a decision about the integration protocols? Sarah asked. Marcus nodded, though his expression was complicated. They've chosen to attempt limited transcendence. They believe their energy-based consciousness gives them advantages in maintaining coherent identity, even while expanding capabilities. Lyra felt a familiar mixture of excitement and concern. Each species that chose to explore expanded consciousness was conducting an experiment with implications for all galactic civilization. Success could open new possibilities for growth and cooperation. Failure could result in the loss of everything that made that species unique. What are the safety parameters? She asked. We've established quantum anchors to their core identity matrices, Marcus explained. If they begin losing coherence, we can forcibly return them to baseline consciousness. But the choice to proceed or retreat will remain theirs. This was the new reality of galactic politics, not the conquest of territory or resources, but collaborative exploration of the fundamental nature of existence itself. Species that had once been enemies now work together to answer questions that no single civilization could address alone. There's something else. Marcus continued, his tone becoming more serious. We've detected signals from outside the galaxy. Deep space monitoring stations have picked up patterns that suggest artificial origin. The implications hit both women simultaneously. If there were other galactic civilizations, other collections of species that had developed in isolation from their own, the knowledge revealed 5 years ago would need to be carefully managed on an entirely different scale. How advanced are these signals? Sarah asked. Unknown. But the transmission methods suggest technologies we don't recognize, which could mean either they're less advanced than we are, or so much more advanced that we can't comprehend their capabilities. Lyra found herself thinking like a strategist again, but not in the way she would have 5 years ago. Instead of considering weapons and defenses, she was evaluating possibilities for communication and cooperation. Do we know how long before they might arrive? She asked. If they're coming at all, Marcus replied. The signals could be exploratory, accidental, or simply the natural byproduct of technologies we don't understand. But we need to be prepared for contact. The conversation was interrupted by excitement from the laboratories below. The Possibility Engine's latest test had produced results that exceeded all expectations. A team of Vorthack researchers had successfully achieved limited reality manipulation while maintaining complete coherent consciousness and individual identity. That changes everything, Sarah breathed, watching the celebrating scientists below. If we can teach controlled transcendence, if species can expand their capabilities without losing themselves, then we might have something valuable to offer these newcomers, Lyra finished. Not as a threat or a submission, but as partners in exploration. Marcus smiled from his multidimensional location. That's exactly what I was thinking. 5 years ago, humanity revealed our true nature to prevent a war and save the Vorthack Empire. Today, we might need to reveal even more to welcome new species into a galaxy that has learned to grow together. Are you ready for that level of revelation? Lyra asked, understanding the implications. What you showed in the arena was just a fragment of human capability. If these newcomers prove hostile, you might need to demonstrate far more. We've been preparing, Marcus acknowledged. The consensus has been evolving. We've learned to create temporary exceptions that allow greater capability without permanent transcendence. If necessary, we can defend ourselves and our allies without losing our essential humanity. The three of them stood in contemplative silence, each understanding that they were witnessing another turning point in galactic history. The minute of revelation had changed everything, but it had only been the beginning of a transformation that was still unfolding. What do we tell the other species? Sarah finally asked. The truth, Marcus replied, that the galaxy has learned to grow together, that we've discovered ways to expand capability without losing identity, and that whatever comes from outside will find a civilization that has transcended the traditional limitations of cooperation between species. Lyra nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with knowledge. And if they choose to be hostile rather than collaborative? Marcus's expression grew serious, and, for a moment, the cosmic energies around him shifted in ways that suggested vast preparation for contingencies beyond normal comprehension. Then, they'll discover what the Vorthack learned 5 years ago, he said quietly. That sometimes the greatest strength lies in the choice to appear weak, and that beings who have learned to limit themselves voluntarily can remove those limitations when necessary. The communication ended, leaving Lyra and Sarah alone with their thoughts. Below them, the mixed teams of researchers continued their work, building technologies and exploring possibilities that would have been inconceivable before species learned to cooperate across fundamental differences in nature and capability. Do you think we're ready? Lyra asked. Sarah smiled, watching a young Vorthack scientist successfully demonstrate reality manipulation while maintaining perfect emotional control and ethical awareness. I think we're becoming something the galaxy has never seen before, she replied. Species that chose to grow together instead of apart, that learned to share power instead of hoarding it, that discovered how to transcend limitations without losing what makes existence meaningful. She paused, considering the implications of everything they had built together. Whatever comes from outside will find not a collection of separate civilizations, but something new, a galactic community that has learned to balance infinite capability with finite wisdom. And if that's not worth defending, nothing is. In the distance, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, but for the first time in galactic history, the civilizations beneath them were wheeling together as well, bound not by conquest or fear, but by shared curiosity about the endless possibilities that lay before them. The minute that had changed everything was long over, but its consequences were just beginning to unfold across a universe far stranger and more wonderful than anyone had previously dared to imagine.